Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We'll be flipping you guys to panelists, so feel free to turn on your cameras, unmute your mics, and just say hello while we get set up here.
Hi.
Hey, Amelia, how are you?
Good, how are you? First, I was like, is this a one-on-one?
More people will come. We originally set it up as a webinar, but we thought it would be more fun if you guys got to turn on your cameras. I know speaking to a lot of you are used to having black screens on when talking to your class. So that's something we definitely wanted to avoid this time around. So we make do. How's everyone doing? Bonnie, Charles, nice to see you guys as well. All right, a lot of people are here. That's good, I guess. Let's see. I know all of you one-on-one, so it's so interesting to see you guys communicate. It's such a weird. Let's see here. All right. Let's see here. Alex, thanks for joining. How are you?
Good. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Great.
Thanks for jumping in. For those of you who don't know, Alex teaches 1,800 students in Econ 101, so he's quite a busy man. So we're happy that he's here to chat with all of us today. How's
It's
the
1,700 now. I lost 100. I must have scared him off.
That's so interesting. Losing 100 would mean a whole class for someone else, but that's just a drop in the bucket for you, I guess.
What subject are you teaching out of curiosity?
Economics. It's Econ 101, so it's like a course, like a big prereq for most programs at our school.
And the exam's coming up soon too, I bet, eh?
Yeah, a week on Saturday.
Nice. All multiple choice, I'm assuming.
Yeah, definitely. And numeric response, but yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah, so those who are joining now, basically, we originally created this as a webinar, but we felt that it'd be more helpful if everyone could turn on their cameras and interact with each other and unmute if necessary to ask questions. I'll be sharing the agenda in a second, but we've got some really cool segments coming up here and should be good to go. So let's see here. Right, so I'll share my screen here and we'll get started. All right. Well, you guys should all be able to see my screen now. So thanks again, everyone, for joining today. I know finding some time on a Wednesday afternoon in the middle of exam season and some other things, it's nice for you guys to make some time to chat today. But basically, this is our first ever, our inaugural community of practice event. This is something we're hoping that will be a recurring event moving forward. And basically, we want to build a community as well to help you guys interact and learn from one another. Like I mentioned earlier, I've talked to a bunch of you one-on-one, but I think that more than just me, I think everyone in this community has some really great ideas on activities and rubrics and some other things that I think will help get us started. So moving along, this is the planned agenda for today. Sorry if you're not in Eastern time, use some quick math to convert where we're at, but so just getting introduced here and getting set up as more people continue to file in. And we'll be starting first off with Dr. Karen Freeberg, who's a specialist in creating online communities and going through sort of what our initial plans are for Kritik and for the community as well. So I'm not sure if Karen's here. Karen, can you unmute or turn on your camera so I can see?
Yes. I'm actually using the original Dr. Freeberg sign-in for today's event. So I'm listed under as Laura Freeberg, but I'm here.
Sounds good. So for those of you who don't know, we have both Dr. Laura Freeberg and Dr. Karen Freeberg, who are both professors. And Dr. Laura Freeberg is the original. She's a professor as well and teaches psychology. And her daughter, Dr. Karen Freeberg, is here today, and she'll be talking about some of her experience with Kritik as well as with online community. And so Karen, I looked at your website online. For those of you who don't know, she's a professor of social media, as well as an author, a blogger, and just a person who knows the internet really well. Karen, is there anything else that I missed about you? If you want to give a brief intro to the team.
Yeah, no, it's a great to be here, Eli. And so thank you so much. I've been a big fan, of course, of Critic. I know I've been able to use it in my class, this semester at the University of Louisville. But yeah, I do everything related to social media. I've been at U of L almost 10 years, and it's been a great opportunity to incorporate leading edge technology and tools to kind of engage with, my students and be able to share that with fellow professors. As Eli mentioned, I also manage a community of professors on social media on Facebook, otherwise known as SM Profs. And so that is something that I get to do in my free time. And that's why coffee is a major food group. So.
You're muted, Eli.
Yeah, there we go. So yeah, Karen, thanks again for that introduction. So for those, as she mentioned, Karen runs a social media professors community group online. And basically, as you can see in the screenshot on the slides, it has about 2,000 members right now. And correct me if I'm wrong, Karen, but it was founded, I think, 4 years ago. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. So it was 4 years ago. And I, for someone who teaches social media, like when I first started, it's been a while now, there weren't really that many resources. And so when I was kind of going through and developing a social media class and program at the University of Louisville, it was really a lot of research, a lot of talking to people, kind of see who's doing what. And so it really came out actually 4 years ago. I was actually doing a research project interviewing professors who teach social media. And one of them said, I really wish there was a place for all of us to share ideas, share tips, the good, the bad, or like connect with other people who are teaching it, because they feel, there were a lot of professors that I knew that were the only ones teaching social media at their school. And so they felt a little isolated. And so I thought, well, light bulb kind of went on and said, okay, this is a great community. So yeah, as Eli mentioned, we have about 2,000 members from all over the world. We have representatives from great tech companies like Critic and Top Hat and Facebook and all of the other social media platforms. So I didn't realize it would be this big. When I first started, I thought, I get 5 people to join. That would be great. So it's been a really great resource. It's something that I wish I had when I was starting out in my career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so in terms of the medium and sort of the discipline you teach in, social media as a whole is really a new concept for a lot of people, and younger people are really bringing it on and making it important in business in a variety of ways. And as you mentioned, when you first started, because it's a relatively new medium and a focus of study, did you feel isolated in sort of, when you first got the role at Louisville? Like, how did that sort of the social media sort of department or those kind of courses come to be, and how did you sort of
Yeah, so how did it kind of get started at Louisville? I honestly, I didn't really feel isolated too much, just because I was getting hired on as a strategic communications professor. So that was kind of like my foundation. So at least I had other colleagues who did that. But with social media, I'm pretty independent myself. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to do this, see how it goes. And so when I was at the University of Louisville, at the beginning, people, it was still relatively new to have a social media class. So I felt, I have no problem being a guinea pig and saying, okay, I'm going to go out and see what works, what doesn't, and learn from the experiences. So as I was kind of experimenting around with new tools, new programs, new collaborations in the classroom, I learned a lot. And as those collaborations kind of continued on, the more awareness of the brand, the class kind of came to be in the community and in the nation. And then other people were like, oh, okay, I want to incorporate this in my university. So it just was kind of a trickle effect. And so now, I mean, there's master's programs, there's areas that, people can specialize in their doctoral programs. There's, departments that are kind of rising in social media. So it's really exciting. But at U of L, we're kind of creating a specialization in that, and which I'm really excited about.
Right. Yeah, and so for some of you, you probably are like, well, I don't know anything about social media, and why is this important to me? Well, what Karen has created in terms of her social media group is really an incredibly motivating and positive environment for people to interact. And so just Karen and added myself and a few of the other Critic members to that group. And people, especially in online learning, have resorted to this group to learn from one another, for teaching strategies, for tools to use. And it's something that we want to emulate in terms of Kritik. We want to build a place or a community where you don't have to talk to me to get help on your rubric. You can engage with the whole community, ask for ideas and what works in an activity, what doesn't, what you've tried. And so, Karen, in terms of online learning, with everyone switching online, especially from classes that might be really hands-on like yours, what did people talk about in your community? Did you find that it became even more active because people were searching for help?
Yeah, absolutely, Eli. I mean, it really was something that I'm glad that we had a place, for people to come to get advice, to get resources. Because one of the things that my area is in PR specifically, and what we were finding is that everyone was so overwhelmed in our main professional organizations that people were like, oh my gosh, like we're not even getting the resources that we need to bring into our classes. They didn't really know to where to go. And then basically this, what was really cool about this group, as you said, we shared, various insights and best practices. Like I have 2 other moderators for the group, who are working with me. So we were sharing advice, but everyone else was chipping in saying, hey, let's work together, let's help out. So everyone came together as part of the community, and it just kind of grew. So before the pandemic, we had about, I would say, maybe 1,400 members, so then it just kind of came boom because the power of word of mouth. People are like, oh my gosh, I'm getting so many resources, so much value. And that's the thing about community, is really making sure that the content you're sharing and the people feel welcome and included as part of this community, that they're getting some sort of value, both, whether it's through teaching or connections and collaborations. And that's why we have industry professionals such as yourself and the rest of the team at Kritik. So, professors are able to have those ongoing conversations, because some of the other professional communities that we were a part of we didn't have those relationships. So that was one thing that I wanted to do with this group. So, but as a result, I think it really reassured people that there was support out there, that people were going through the same thing, and really kind of felt, a sense of relief that they knew, like if they had questions, they could go somewhere and they would be able to get help.
Right. Sorry, my internet's cutting in and out here a little bit, but yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think that's sort of what we're trying to emulate, as I mentioned earlier. And do you find that, as my screenshot on the PowerPoint here that you can see, you created a new handbook call for papers, and it seems that there's also an opportunity for research as well. So do you find that people within the community network with one another to produce research, or just to sort of discuss learning objectives that extend beyond just the scope of a course?
Yeah, absolutely. So this community really is really kind of in combining all of the things that I think really make sure that we incorporate as kind of being like the modern day professor. It's like, we have all these sense of, responsibilities. We have teaching, we have service, we have research, and then there's kind of new expectations for us to be connected with the industry, or being innovative with what tools and collaborations we're able to bring into our classes for our students. And those are things that are also shared within the group. So there are questions about, hey, does anyone know how to, use this tool for research? And then there's others might say, okay, has anyone heard about this opportunity or this call for papers? And some people post job postings there saying, hey, we want to get a candidate that has social media skills. Why don't we go to a place that, where social media professors are. And I think too, what's been really cool about the industry as well is that it kind of shows that, because what I find, and one thing that I've struggled with even in my role in social media, is the industry doesn't know that we exist for the most part, which is surprising. Right. And like building those relationships with teams, like I know I had a conversation with the Facebook Blueprint team, so that's kind of their training and education sector of Facebook. And they had no idea at first, a few years ago, that there were professors who were teaching social media. They only thought it was present at a few schools. And I was like, well, here's a community that, on your platform that is having these conversations. And so right now we have about 20 people, who are part of it. And so it's really kind of like, it's grown, it's matured over the years. As you said, Eli, it's 4 years. And so hopefully we're going to try to expand it. But what's cool is we're coming in with representatives from all over the world. So we have people, from Europe, Asia, South America, Africa. It's really cool to kind of see the conversations kind of come all together, that everyone's bringing together social media.
Right. Yeah. All over the world coming together. It's as a discipline is growing, as your community will definitely benefit from that as well. And so now, yeah, you can see all of you. I've seen a bunch of you interact with our poll. I know myself when involved with several Facebook groups, but I myself am more of a lurker. I like to look at what other people are talking about, but I'm trying to become a bit more involved in the participation process. And I see that some of you are not big fans of Facebook. I see that some of you would like LinkedIn or Slack, some other great tools that we can use. So based on Karen's success and sort of the nature and the environment she's created, we created a Facebook group for now. It is subject to change. We might integrate it directly within Kritik. But for now, if you are interested to see more of the discussion there, if you do log into Facebook and if you do type in Kritik HQ, you'll be prompted to like our page. And so once you click on like the page, we'll then invite you to our inaugural group, Kritik Community of Practice, and we'll be sending polls out there. We'll be releasing feature requests there and basically continuing a discussion there and trying to answer as many questions and gather as much info there for now as possible. So my colleague James will start as you start to like it. I can see Charles already did, which is great. We'll start adding you to the community and we'll revisit this as well. But as Karen mentioned, I think having this resource, especially in an online community and having one another around to learn from each other, I think could be really, really helpful. And so while Karen's here, I know she's got a meeting in a few minutes. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to unmute and ask her about her community or how community can help them do better in Kritik or in courses generally?
Well, I just want to take a moment too, Eli, to thank you and the great team at Kritik, because I've been able to use Kritik this past semester for my Intro to Strategic Communication class, and where we incorporated a lot of elements related to social media, and it really was well received by my students. And so it was really a wonderful opportunity. So I want to thank you and the team publicly for that.
Can I actually ask the question, Laura?
Oh, yes, Amelia. Yeah, I'm actually Karen. I'm just using my mom's side.
Oh, sorry, Karen, my bad. Steven says it down.
All good.
So what do you do? Like, most of my students aren't on Facebook. And in fact, my majors, when we say, go to our Facebook page for the department, or we have a private Facebook page for the majors, they're like, Facebook is for old people and I'm not on there. Like, I want to do Snapchat or Instagram or whatever, the next thing. When I was in, I think, college, it was like MySpace.
Oh, yes.
So how do you deal with that if students, for example, like I'm off Facebook just because I'm like, I don't want to see people behaving badly during the pandemic. But others, depending on their age, and I teach from like, people that are older than me to 17-year-olds that are in high school taking college classes. Like, how do you offer variability that they could go across platforms usually to create these assignments? Or is it usually like, no, you have to join Facebook?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because I get that a lot. My students say the most common thing I get from my students is I'm boycotting Facebook, but I'm joining Instagram. But then I kind of tell them, Instagram is owned by Facebook. And so, but yeah, I do get it's a great question. I do give them variability. I do tell them, especially with the students that I teach, it is strategic communications and social media. I tell them, yes, you're going to need to know how these platforms are using, because that, for us, we need to know where our audiences are. And a lot of the audiences that our students want to reach for internships and brands they're working for are still on Facebook. So the data, I do share them the data saying, okay, here's where all of the audiences are, here's their time. And so it is kind of surprising for the students when they do look at the data and say, wow, okay, there's a lot of people still on Facebook. But I tell them, it could change, next year. It could change in a few months. I mean, that's the nature of technology, is we have to go where our audiences are. So it's constantly learning, where to reach our audiences. And so for assignments, I do give my students a range, and I do encourage them to expand to other outlets. And so I've had some really creative students over the years who have done some great work, like looking at how to use Reddit for example, for an assignment, or they go, now it's been TikTok. So you do want to have some flexibility, but you also want to provide them with the research and data to kind of show, like, you may like a certain platform and your friends may like certain platforms to use, and that's perfectly fine. Everyone has a preference. But if you're looking at a professional kind of engaging other audiences on behalf of a client or a business, you need to kind of look at the full picture of things. So that's kind of how I feel it. I mean, I like Facebook. I mean, the reason why our community started on Facebook was just because at the time we didn't really have a lot of options, for groups. We do have a Twitter account as well for the community. So I'm a big I would say Twitter is actually my favorite platform of social media, just because of the relationships and building that way. But with Facebook, I like the fact that you are able to share documents. I'm also able to get insights, to kind of see what posts resonate with audiences in the community. But also it is a place where a lot of professors I know in my community already are there with their own Facebook groups for their classes, and they do a lot of stuff there. Yeah, that was a great question.
Thanks again, Karen, for coming in and talking to us about the importance of community. If those of you who don't like Facebook, the more of you that talk about it on the Facebook discussion group, the more likely we'll move to another platform. So feel free to interact there. And Karen, thanks again for your time today. I know you've got a busy day ahead of you.
Anytime.
And so now we'll be moving on to a really hot ticket item about Kritik that in my conversations with all of you that you didn't necessarily know much about. And so that's calibration. I know we talk about calibration and its effect on the grading power, but I think it would be better if our co-CEO and co-founder, Dr. Mohsin Shahini, came on and shared a bit about calibration and its real impact and why it's so important to run it early. So I'm sure Mohsin's somewhere here in the meeting, but Mohsin, do you want to take over and share your screen and explain calibration?
Sure. Yeah. Let's get people to vote on the poll so we see where people are at. But yes, guys, thank you, Eli, and thanks everyone. My name is Mohsin. I'm the co-founder here. Just before I get to calibration, I know that there are definitely some debates around which community is the best, which platform is the best, and we do actually have our own community in Kritik. We are working on it. It's called discussion right now. We're going to change that actually to community. That's, my belief is that community needs to be integrated. If we want to get a good community for our students, especially, it needs to be integrated into whatever platform they're comfortable with. Unfortunately, LMSs don't really have a great community platform and discussions. And in my previous company, Top Hat, we built, something called, a Slate, which is very good. And then here in Kritik, we're building another version. So maybe in the next version of this event, we will talk a little bit more and maybe we'll move to our own community of our own platform. Okay, cool. So are you sharing the slide, Jen? Oh, there is no slide here, so I can just talk over the calibration. So it looks like most people, they do kind of know what calibration is all about. And they understand that this is for accuracy of the grading. There is research done on calibrated peer review actually at UCLA. Some of you might already be familiar with that research. So, and actually it's a tool that called calibrated peer review. It's essentially the idea behind calibrated peer review is that you would make sure that your students, they know how to grade, and the ones that their grading is aligned with your standards, they're going to have bigger grading power. So we didn't have this feature when we launched the platform last fall. So some of you, if you used it last January, it was not available. However, we launched it in the summer. We have seen that maybe because we didn't really properly explain this clearly to people, we have seen that many professors don't take advantage of this feature, unfortunately. So I'm hoping that today we could explain to you how this system works in case that you, especially if you teach larger classes, I would say, it would definitely improve the quality of grading if you run a calibration at the beginning of the semester. So there's two purposes to calibration. One is that it is designed to ensure grading accuracy among your students, which many people voted, but also it is for teachers to teach the students how to grade effectively. Because the students after the calibration, they're going to look at how the grading power adjusted, because we have something called grading power. And then they're going to see the rank up and down. We have a UI that shows them if the rank went up and down. And then they're going to look back and say, oh, okay, here's how my professor wanted me to grade. So maybe if I was too lean or maybe too harsh, maybe next time around, I'm going to change my grading, standards. So that's pretty much in a nutshell. I don't know to what extent we want to talk. It's very straightforward. I don't know, Eli, do you think we have time to actually quickly show how people can get access to that feature?
I can show you really quickly. I think it's really important, though, to go over the grading power again, just once more really quickly. When you are calibrating, especially at the beginning of the term, the system doesn't know and the students haven't proved which evaluators are the best. By having the calibration, which I'll show in a quick second on how to set it up, the students, when they start the class, are all at level 1, which is the beginner grading power. By choosing 3 samples from an activity and calibrating against it, certain students who know how to grade, their grading will change. And so basically after the ones who really know how to grade closest to you will do really well in their ability to calibrate and grade moving forward. And so to actually go through and see how it works, I'll show you really quickly here.
And for you, I think it's Karen, you asked the question, how often to run calibration. Usually you should, one calibration at the beginning of the semester should suffice, but we have seen sometimes professors run 2. You don't really need to run too many calibration. It's really up to like how much your activities changes. So if the nature of your activities changes dramatically throughout the semester, then maybe you want to run another calibration. But if your nature of the activities are the same, like, it's all about essay writing, all about presentations, and the rubrics are more or less the same, then usually one should be enough. Yeah, Eli, you were showing. I guess you froze.
I think Alex Gaynor is using the calibration. So
calibrate activities that are graded. So an activity has to go through the critic process, be graded and be finalized, and then you can choose it from here. I typically call it grading exercise. And then you'll have the same objective instructions from the first activity, and then you basically select all of the students' work will be organized from highest to lowest based on the peers grade. It's incredibly important to actually go in and change the grade here for calibration. You're going to be grading 3 of them yourself, ideally of varying quality, and basically the students are then going to have the opportunity to try to grade similarly to you. Grading it here and changing the grade, for example, for Christine, who got an 83 to whatever you give it here, won't affect what she already got because the activity was finalized. And so you'll be basically giving these students an opportunity to evaluate one another. I won't count for the grades because the activity is finalized. And it's a great way early on to view the grading power of the students and seeing how it changes from activity to activity, which you can see by clicking on students and hovering over their little icons. If you have any questions about that, continue to use the chat as well, and we can go from there.
Yeah.
Eli, I have a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, for sure.
So about calibration, so I did the calibration week 2, and I talked to you and James about it, but what I found is that the grading power increases too quickly. And by week 3 or 4, everybody was like diamond. And I'm concerned about that. So I'm hoping to wait to hear back from James about the algo. The second thing that is important for at least me is to see more information about the grading quality of the students by student, because it's hard to see it with the diamond and the stars and everything. So I would say the more information you give us in the form of a spreadsheet or a panel or a dashboard that we can look at to examine beyond just the stars, because I found the stars to be nice, but as I said, they're too quick, and I don't know why they're changing really. And we did a little bit of experiments, Eli, and when we saw there's no adjustment. The final thing that I would say is related to calibration. I spot checked about a third of my students' grades every week, every assignment. I basically graded them myself. And what I found are two things. One, the average from the students was by and large quite accurate. Now, when there were deviations, I intervened and I graded. Is that similar in its effect to calibration, in its adjusting the students who deviated from mine, not through a calibration activity, but through intervention on my part? So these are the points I wanted to ask and see what your comments.
Yeah, Mohsen, I think you
Yeah,
want to take it.
sure, absolutely. So the first one that you said about the diamond. So yes, we constantly changing, trying to tune. We have been in business for about a year. So we have a data scientist, that will look into the data to try to see how fast we need to change the stars, and so that's something that we usually have to wait for one semester to get data and tune it. So it's not something that we can experiment overnight, unfortunately, but it is getting better. You're right. We realized at the beginning of the semester that some of the calibrations, the way that the students adjusted the grid could have been better. So we have done another release, and we're hoping that the new calibration would be more, I would say, tuned with what we believe that according to data. Is really about the data science. So we need to look into really what the students' performance are, and what percentage of the students we believe that they do good grading. So it's not a objective solution to this question. Is really a lot of it is a lot of data mining, and that's something that improves for sure. The second question you said, I guess what you're saying is that there is also a second calibration which is based on intervention. I guess what you're saying, intervene, and that's true. And
that's my question: whether it is acting as adjusting the grading power of a particular student who deviated in a particular assignment that I happen to have intervened in or graded myself.
And that's right. You're absolutely right. So whenever you do that intervention, all those students who were part of the evaluations that led to the grade that you changed it, they are going to be, now we have new data, which is your source of truth. Then our algorithm is going to use your data, your grading, and then we're going to recalibrate them based on what they did versus what you did. That's right.
And the third thing that I mentioned is something that's long-term. I mentioned it to James when we were on one-on-one, is to give us a little bit more data about how many students deviated, things like that. Especially, I just saw that you included this professor graded icon, which is kind of nice, that the students are able to know that the professor actually graded their assignment together with the peers. So I think that is nice.
For sure, yeah. This is statistics is great. Some professors really love data, and as they say, Brett is also mentioned the same thing. For sure, yeah. Those are things that we definitely can add it into the roadmap. I appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, thank you.
Unfortunately, we are on a tight schedule, but there are several great questions about calibration that I think, whether it be on Facebook or whether we're talking in the chat, that we can help answer. As Mohsen mentioned, it is just a feature we did release recently at the beginning of this term, and there is a ways to go to make it as impressive as we want it to be. So continuing the conversation on how to make it better will be fantastic for us to make it
One
better.
last point I do want to mention, though, is that I would say one thing that differentiates Kritik from other peer evaluation is that we do have, my background is AI, so we are constantly looking into how to improve the quality of the peer grading. So for example, some people mentioned that how could we could detect, for example, if someone gives everyone 5, and then we could flag them to you and say, hey, look at these 5, we suspect that their evaluation may, or maybe they logged in last minute, someone just logged in like a minute to the deadline and then just grading, so probably they didn't put the time. So those are, we call it recommendation engine. That's one of the things we have in the roadmap, hopefully for the 2021. Hopefully we're going to get to a very good place in terms of the accuracy of the graders.
Fantastic. So we are on not only a time constraint for the event, but some of our participants have busy days ahead of them. So the next thing we wanted to talk about is still related to calibration, but more so its impact in a large class, where you can't, be as keen on spot checking as you'd like to be, as well as, interact with group activities. So we brought Alexander Gaynor. Dr. Gaynor is a professor at the University of Alberta, teaching economics. And as I mentioned, he teaches over 1,700 students. And so he ran some really interesting group activities about Kritik and also calibrated them early on. And so I have a few questions for Dr. Gaynor, if he can unmute.
Sure, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine. And thanks again for finding some time to chat today. But I think it would be beneficial for everyone, Alex, if we talked about, the impact of calibration early on in a class of your size and what that means. And so basically my first question is, why did you want to use calibration in your class of 1,700 students?
Well, in general, like I started using calibration, it probably would have been in January or May, I think. So I started using Kritik last fall, a while back anyways, before you had calibration. And I wasn't too worried about grading accuracy. I found even without calibration that grading was fairly good. But so my big reason for using calibration was early on in the term giving feedback to my students. So give them a calibration activity. And then right after that deadline follow-up, just saying, hey guys, make sure you follow up on your calibration exercise to see, are you marking too easy or too hard on grammar or application or content? Or so I can really early on, they can get information on, where they have to improve.
Awesome. Yeah. And did you ever look into the grading power differences after the calibration? Did you know where to look for that? And what were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I did notice it is a big class. So I don't often look at individual student, but I do look at, just when I look at the students, if you don't know where to find it, if you just click students, you can see their diamonds. And I did notice it did change their grading power. I didn't have the issue where everyone was diamond. It's quite varied in my class, from 1 star to 5 or 6 stars, whatever the max is. So I didn't have that issue. But yeah, I did find it, I didn't really do it for grading accuracy, but it does improve grading accuracy a bit. And I did notice it did change students' grading power. And I noticed the evaluation scores after, I don't know if this is supposed to be the outcome, but the first activity grading score is quite high. And then after that, which I guess makes sense because it's not weighted. The activity 1 evaluation isn't a weighted score, but after calibration, the evaluation scores drop a bit. So I think they're like 70% activity 1 evaluation. And then after the calibration, it dropped to 65. And now I'm on activity 5 and it's up to 72. So that's kind of great. It adjusted everything. And for most, usually it's probably similar for you guys, students are marking to a bit too easy. So it knocks it all down a bit. They get information about where they're marking too easy or too hard. And yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And one thing that's come up in a lot of my meetings with all of you guys one-on-one to help you get set up is that you sometimes, thinking about the variety, the scale of a strong assignment to choose for calibration, a mediocre one and a poor one, is that you're afraid to sort of, choose a submission that wasn't done well, and have that student knowing.
Sorry, I missed what you just said there. I think you cut out.
Did I?
Yeah, I think Eli maybe cut out for a second there, but I'll pick it back up, Alex. I'm John, by the way, guys. I'm our VP of Business Development, and it looks like Eli's back, maybe?
Yeah, sorry
Okay.
about that. Can you
All right, I'll just go back into the darkness then.
Alex, I don't know how much you caught up on my question, but would you prefer the option in calibration to start your course off with a calibration activity, not based on your current course, basically taking samples from last semester, and calibrating and starting off Kritik with calibration as opposed to a regular Kritik activity?
Yeah, probably. It's tricky. Well, you want creations. It's great. After activity 1, you have creations from that class. So if you have if I have an Econ 101 from the past and I can use those creations, I guess that would probably be ideal. I guess if I could do that before activity 1, they can get feedback early on evaluation before they do it for real. The way I do it is activity 1 is just not graded. So I kind of like that. Activity 1, the creation mark and the evaluation mark isn't graded. So I tell students, you get a chance, one chance without the stress of being graded, of getting familiar with the Kritik platform, and then you haven't done the calibration exercise. So I understand you're not that comfortable or aware of how evaluation works. So that works fairly good if you make activity 1 not graded. But otherwise, yeah, actually, it would be nice probably to have calibration be the very first thing they do.
Cool. Yeah, it depends. I know that some professors didn't do what you did in terms of their first activity was weighted. Obviously, you're a seasoned vet with using Kritik, so you know what to expect. And yeah, I can see that, you know, Laura Freeberg and Julie Morris would appreciate that feature. So we can manually set it up now. So for those of you who are interested for next semester to start off Kritik with a calibration exercise based on 3 samples you've chosen, and you want to guide them through evaluation first, just send me.
I think you cut out again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Like it wasn't
oh,
you.
there he is.
Um,
You just cut
did
out
you
for the last.
assign-
Eli, we missed your last like 10 seconds there.
Sounds good. Thanks, John.
Whereas,
My last question for you, Alex, is Kritik calibration is not graded within the Kritik system. How did you incentivize 1,700 students to complete the calibration?
I think I just forgot to tell them it wasn't graded. That helped. And I'll use that going forward. I'll just play ignorant and forget to tell them it's not graded. That's
Right.
pretty good. But I tell them like it's a great, I just tell them, well, the feedback from students, first time I did calibration, I was worried. I had 2 concerns. It'd be a lot of work for me. And then another thing my students would have to do, and they'd complain about being overwhelmed with assessments, but it's really easy to set up calibration. It wasn't much work for me. And it's really quick for the students. It's just, you know, 3 evaluations. So most of my students can do that in 5 and 10 minutes. So it's not, doesn't take up much of their time. And I tell them, this is going to be big for you to get a high evaluation mark the rest of the term. So I guess that's the main way I incentivize them, is tell them, you know, it won't take much time, and it'll really, if you do it and then look at the results afterwards, it's really going to up your evaluation mark afterwards.
Yeah, and I can see that a few others in the chat said the same thing. I never told them it's not graded as well, and most of them did it. I've noticed with a few professors that giving them a 1% bonus mark or giving them something small for just completing it does help with that completion, obviously. So you might want to consider doing that as well. But yeah, we can talk about calibration all day and every day, but we do have a schedule we need to move on to, and Alex has many things to take care of. So thanks again, Alex, for joining.
Yeah, you're welcome. And actually, maybe one other thing to just jump in on, like the questions about calibration earlier. I just kind of wanted to say, well, Kritik's become quite popular in my department, Department of Economics. So I've been helping colleagues a lot, and I found my colleagues have viewed calibration as like a panacea, like it'll fix the grading power. They don't realize, like for Kritik, it really, you need a good rubric. Like that's a necessary condition for it to run good. So if your evaluations scores are wonky or your grading is wonky, in my view, like, or my work with colleagues there, it's likely the issue is rubric or maybe instructions, not the calibration or the algorithm. Just, I guess, keep that in mind. It's having done about, I don't know, 8 or 10 courses through that. It's so important to get that rubric right. I know some in the chat mentioned that you guys are working on a way to share rubrics, but that's the main thing. Calibration, if you have a poor rubric, then calibration or, you know, any AI or algorithm won't really make up for that.
Yeah, and as Alex mentioned, using Kritik 8 or 10 times now in a variety of ways in different courses, you get better at it as you use it. And so one big part of this community that we want to kind of push to you guys is the ability to share rubrics. I think a lot of you have created really cool ones that could be applied and tweaked in other courses. And so I'd love to carry that conversation on in our Facebook group and help you guys share that around. But thanks for your time, Alex. And I really appreciate your insights. Teaching a large class, you know, that size really helps us understand what can and cannot be accomplished in Kritik. So thanks as always for jumping on and continuing to use the product.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll have to sign up. I got a meeting to go to, but it's great. I'll watch the recordings for what I missed afterwards. See you guys.
Sounds good, Alex. Take care. All right, and so the next part of our meeting is something that we also released relatively new in terms of features, and we have more coming up to help automate that process, is group activities. And our next guest, Professor David Wang, will be joining us. I think he's in here somewhere. If he can maybe unmute and turn on his camera.
I'm here.
Oh, perfect. Hi, Dave. How are you?
Good, thanks.
Thanks for joining today. So, Dave and I chatted briefly about what we'll be talking about, but something I wanted to share with the whole community that Dave sent around to his students is he explained the importance of critic and peer review in his class, and it was done so well that I think his students really understood why they were doing it. And so I'll play a few seconds of it.
You will receive feedback that is shown to be consistent with that of an instructor or a teaching assistant directly marking your work. You'll be getting a detailed feedback on everything you submit, but simply wouldn't be possible with the limited time and resources available to your instructors or your teams. The small cost of software is more than reasonable in that you will need a highly level team to give you a thorough quality assessment for every single position, allowing you to respond well in the course of the field correctly. To reassure you of the integrity of this marking methodology, we'll be doing spot checks at random to ensure that everything is working and to check for consistency of what the students are receiving as marks as compared to what we would normally expect if we run each and every individual assignment.
And so I wanted to share that video really quickly with everyone because, that was unprompted. David created that on his own, and I think we were all very, very impressed by the video he created because it helps, and there's more to it if you guys want to watch it. It's on our YouTube channel, basically explaining the importance of peer review and how it's a valuable learning skill. So
there's a small cost.
We'll move on to that video. But yeah, as I mentioned, Dr. David Wang is a professor of engineering at the University of Waterloo. And Dave, if you want to give us just a brief introduction on what led you to where you are right now in your teaching at Waterloo.
Sure. I teach electrical and computer engineering, which means I teach the nerds and the introverts, basically. We've found over the years that it was very difficult to get our students to come together as a community. And with the pandemic, it became even worse. So we decided to use Critic and incorporate group activities significantly in our coursework to basically force them right from the very beginning to start working in groups and getting to know each other. So I teach a course on engineering professionalism. And what I would do is I would take, say, a controversial subject. From my own background, I had a startup company, and we were basically at one point needing to decide whether or not we were going to go into a pornography market because it was very lucrative. And I actually presented that to the students, and and they had to, as a group, argue and decide whether or not they would, as a group, go into this market or not. And they had to weigh the all the various options and all the stakeholders. And so we did a lot of these type of activities. I tried to pick controversial subjects that would get them really talking to each other. And we found that the feedback that we got, I actually can't read the feedback, but it was overwhelmingly positive. They really, from my perspective, the students really thought that they actually really benefited greatly from seeing other people's work. They really enjoyed the process. We did this instead of having them do a final exam, so they really, really enjoyed it. And so, yeah, we were definitely very pleased with how Critic ended up working for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know that you did a lot of, you did some individual activities as well as group activities. And as you mentioned, engineering professionalism for all the first year undergraduate students. And so how did going into an online term and try to sort of reinforce these skills, would you have run more group activities as opposed to the individual ones to help continue that collaboration? Or why did you decide to do some as individual and some as group activities?
The individual is because we do have a requirement that they have to be assessed individually. So I did have some that had to be assessed individually, especially since we didn't have a final exam. The group activities, though, was really where we really felt Critic benefited us a lot. It was much easier to create the activities and have them peer mark. And then my TAs would go in and take a look at all the marks as well to check for consistency, as was suggested before. So we actually did that check as well. There's just no way I have 450 students divided into groups of 4. So there's about 100 groups. And so we would have 400 individual assessments every week, you know, and then 100 group assessments every week. We just could not have done that without Kritik. There just were not enough TAs to go around.
In terms of surveying your student and getting their opinions on Kritik and peer review, I sort of stretched out the image to see if it's easier for you to read. What made you sort of send out the survey? Why did you want to ask these questions? And do you think that peer review did help them in their understanding of the course material?
I think it did, especially in the questions that you see there that are, you know, how did it help you in the learning? And did it help you to see other people's work? And even in individual conversations, the students really, really found it helpful. I mean, if you think about the way you normally assess, right? A TA marks it and they get their paper back and they just see a mark and they complain bitterly. They don't see what other people have submitted. And the fact that they're now seeing what other people submit, one of the big things we found is there were almost no complaints about marks, like almost none. Out of 450, usually very competitive, lone wolf, electrical and computer engineering students, they were almost all, they were all very happy. There were very few complaints and very few people challenged for marks. So someone just asked what kind of course it was. It's about engineering professionalism, covers everything from writing skills to ethics, everything. Yeah, just everything, the soft skills for engineering.
Right. And these are first-year engineering students coming from all over the world who might not have necessarily reinforced these writing skills. So did you make any other sort of tutorial videos on how to give feedback or sort of prep them for the experience in Kritik?
We had TAs actually go through and meet with the groups and then just chat with them. We tried to, because the TAs weren't having to mark as much, they were able to go in and mentor. So that we had groups of TAs go in and talk to each group of students every week. Right.
And so Peter mentioned in the chat about your last question as well. If not having Kritik meant having a final exam in this course, there's a strong opinion to, keep Kritik in the course if it meant removing a final exam. So how much of the Kritik process, how much of a grade did it count towards in the final grade for the students?
Yeah, we have a limit because the students, I think we had a limit of 20% of the mark could be due to Kritik, and that's it. Right. We have a weird rule at Waterloo about not putting, if they have to pay for software, we don't want to, nail them for too many marks. It's kind of a conflict of interest, right? So right. There was a limit. Okay. But that being said, we didn't have a final exam in the course, so I think that did bias things a little bit. So to be quite honest, but I just wanted to ask about that question. I mean, some people do just like having an exam rather than having weekly Kritik deliverables. So I should also mention that they had weekly quizzes as well. So there was weekly quizzes and usually a weekly group deliverable and a weekly individual deliverable.
Right. So there was a lot of upkeep to stay on top of things within the class. But I think one thing that I've noticed as well is when there is a higher allocation of Kritik towards the final grade, I've seen many students, react positively to similar surveys because not only are they learning more, it's less of a stressful environment. Some really great students are not necessarily great test writers and don't succeed in that environment. So I'll be going through another example later as well, where a professor kind of just gave 100% of the course grade to Kritik through 10 different activities and the kind of impact it had on the learning. But I guess if anyone has any questions.
I just want to mention one other thing too. I'd also use Kritik in a graduate course, which is very mathematical, very much proof, theorem, proof. And there it was very interesting. The peer evaluation allowed us to differentiate the good students from the bad students very, very quickly. So it seems like the higher the level of the course, because of the Bloom's taxonomy, in order to be able to mark well, you have to have a better understanding. it became very obvious. And I would say that after the second assignment, because of Critic, we probably could have predicted where people were going to end up with their marks.
Yeah,
So
we have a section coming up, David. I'll be calling on you again to sort of go through that grad class, because we built you a special feature that we'll be releasing to the rest of Critic users, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about that then. But
sounds good. Okay.
Yeah, you're definitely experienced Critic as well as a graduate class in a variety of ways. Does anyone have any questions for Dave while we have him on the floor right now? Anything about Critic, anything about how we use it?
I think maybe a question on the chat. What Laura? Laura read like, will David use Critic if it was less a subjective type course, like a calculus course?
Yeah, and I did use it in basically a high level graduate level math course. And I think that's going to be talked about later.
Right. Yeah. So we'll go into that a little bit later. But yeah, thanks for sharing the poll results. And I'm glad to see that the majority of you want to use group activities for next term as well. I think it's an interesting way, especially if you have a large number of students. I'm sure David and his TAs preferred the group activity. And make changes. We'll go through.
Eli, we're losing you a little bit there. But I believe that we are going to move forward with talking a little bit about some other use cases. And so maybe we will jump.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. The next Critic use is about graphic design by Lauren Wickware.
Yep. And Lauren, are you here with us? If you are, maybe you can let us know. If not, just give me 1 second
to play the video.
Oh, looks like we're gonna need Eli to jump back in here. Just give me 1 sec, guys. Technology, gotta love it, of course. The 1 person out of the 40 attendees we need to have good internet doesn't. So hold on 1 second. I think, yeah, I think we can move forward because I know Shauna is here with us. And yeah, we wanted to talk to her a little bit about how she's using presentations. So Shauna, I think you're here. I saw you earlier.
Yes, I'm here.
Awesome. So yeah, I would love to hear a little bit from you about how you're using Critic in your courses, for presentations, and because I know that's sort of become a bit of an emerging topic, obviously, with things moving to online. Professors have had to find a way to replace that in-person experience where students are giving immediate feedback to each other on presentations. So yeah, would love to hear more from you, and then everyone, please continue to use the chat, ask any questions. And like we said, if we don't get to them now, just for the sake of time, we'll make sure to follow up with a full recap.
Okay, yeah, so I use Critic in an undergraduate capstone course for public health majors. So this is this culminating course that they take prior to graduation. And there's 10 what is referred to as essential public health services, and understanding these services, what they are and how they can be applied in practice is an important part of the course. And so what I did is I identified 6 journal articles which described an application of one of the 10 essential public health services. And then the student's assignment is to read the article and then create what I call the three slide challenge. So In the first slide, they're describing the particular essential public health service in their own words. And then in the second slide, they're explaining how the article demonstrates the essential public health service in a real world setting. And then for the third slide, they're describing an additional example of that particular essential public health service in a real world setting. And this can be an existing example or one that they end up developing on their own. And then what I have them do is I have them do a voiceover on their PowerPoint. So it's like a 3 to 4 minute presentation, and they're giving the presentation, based on their slides. And I chose doing it this way for a number of reasons, but one being that I want my students to have I want them to be able to improve their presentation skills. Many of the students, even the upper level undergraduates, I find that they get nervous when they have to speak in front of groups. And in public health, you do a lot of working with groups and often speaking in front of groups. And so I want them to have this skill. And so it helps them develop the skill, but in kind of more of a casual setting, because they record their voiceover, but they can redo it if they want to redo it. They can re-record, and then they submit when they're ready to submit. So kind of helps them develop this skill in just a more casual format. And then I also think that they're allowed to be more creative with their work. A lot of them use images and they play around with the formatting on PowerPoint. And so it's a little bit more fun than just, writing up essays or long answer questions. And so I have found that I really like doing it this way. And I think the students like it as well.
Awesome. Eli's back. So
Sorry,
maybe
guys.
you can take it back over.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not sure exactly what you guys talked about, but I know, Shauna, that you having used Critic before and having using it this time around, I'm not sure what you would have just explained, but
yeah, Shauna really just gave like a really awesome overview of how she's using Critic for the 3-slide challenge, and gave sort of some of the reasons why she felt that it was an important type of assessment for students to complete.
Right. And so in terms of 3 slides versus the slides last semester, if you were to use this again, would you keep it at 3 slides? Did you felt that it was easy for the students? And did you experience any challenges with them uploading presentations or things of that limit?
Right. So, so previous to the 3-slide challenge, I had a different creation, similar, but what the students were doing is they were doing a 10-slide presentation, and they were almost pretending like they were teaching the essential public health services to a public health 101 class. But I think that the 10 slides, it ended up being too much for the students, especially because they were doing these throughout the semester. They ended up having 6 different assignments, similar assignments throughout the semester. And I think that it became a little bit too overwhelming for them. And also they did struggle with uploading their PowerPoints, just because many of them were including a lot of pictures, and with the voiceover as well, it was exceeding the maximum capacity for them to upload documents. So I did make this change to the 3-slide presentation, and I like it better. I'm not getting any complaints from students about, having them do an assignment that's overburdensome. And I also think that it helps them learn how to distill the information down to the most important points, and to make sure that they're focusing on what's most important. So it's helping them develop that skill as well. And I've had 0 issues with uploading. So that completely, that was one of my main problems in the spring, but that completely disappeared as a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. And that's the 3-slide challenge. An idea is something that I'm experimenting in some other classes with. The ability to understand material and present it and explain it is something that's a real indicator of learning something. And I'm not sure if you've done it anecdotally or just looking at the success of the students, but have you noticed maybe through tests or other assessments sort of an improvement in their comprehension and understanding of the material by having them create these presentations and explain certain concepts? Or
Yeah, absolutely, because they don't, it's not just reading and then regurgitating. They really do have to be able to apply the information and, not only apply it, but they have to understand how these essential services are being used in the practice of public health, and they have to be able to make those linkages and explain that. And so I do think it really does help.
Awesome. And I know that several people have never used presentations, and from our poll, it looks like a lot of people want to see them. Does anyone have any questions for Shauna in terms of using presentations in Critic? If that's something you want to consider using forward, I think she has great experience using it for multiple semesters now. Any questions on presentations for Shauna?
Yes, I have a question. So as far as I could understand from what you just described, and maybe I misunderstood, that presentation is essentially a creation
Yes.
that the student does.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you treat that, does the system Critic then assigns graders to that particular presentation?
Mm-hmm.
And you treat it just like any other creation? That's what I understand.
Yes. So for me, all of my creations are presentations, and do a series of 6 throughout the semester. They get a week to do the creation, and then they get 4 days to do the evaluation and 3 days to do the feedback. So it's just kind of this 2-week looping process that continues throughout the semester.
The only thing that I have comment about, now that I understand it, so how do you deal with the anonymity? Obviously now it is less anonymous because
that is true, because they can hear each other's voices. So
right.
I thought that would be an issue, but I haven't had any students complain about it. I was surprised. I thought I might have students complaining about it. And it seems like it hasn't been as much of a problem as I thought it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in a large class, I think it would be might not be a problem at all, just because, you'd have to be able to recognize the student's voice. And in my class, I think some of them can recognize each other's voices. So it is not completely anonymous, but in a larger class, that wouldn't be a problem at all.
Yeah, I mean, I also thought about this, but then in a smaller class, especially with international students, I felt that that would prevent me from doing something like that. But that's good to know that.
Yeah, no, I do think about that, and I think, is this something that's gonna bother the students, that potentially their identity is known, but I haven't had any issues come up associated with that so far.
Okay, good. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Awesome.
Cool.
So yeah, go ahead, Eli.
While I have internet, I'll move on here. So yeah, thanks, Shauna. That's really helpful. And we'll be sending around the slides to everyone who registered. And basically, I've created little recordings for different, so a 30-second video of Shauna's submission so that you can see how she designed her activities as well. So moving on, we'll move on to David Wang now and how to upload in the evaluate stage in his grad class.
Okay. So I taught like I said, a high-level math course. It was basically theorem proofs. So the assignments that they had to submit were actually, very complicated multi-page proofs. And up until Critic made some concessions to me to modify what we could submit, there was really no way to submit like mathematical proofs. And that's a real disadvantage when you're looking at STEM courses. So they were actually able to implement it. We had a little glitch, but I have to say Critic really solved the problem very, very quickly. And what happened is we can now upload PDFs. We got the students to, some of them had to handwrite. I mean, some of them LaTeX, but the majority of them hand wrote their solutions. They scanned them in, and then the students would basically mark up the PDF and then resubmit them. And then they would get the process is exactly the same as before. But it was very, very interesting. Well, I added a level of complexity, but there's no other way to sort of evaluate math. And so it's gone fairly successfully. We haven't been able to get a poll going. I guess I'm overworking the students, so I can't get more than a quarter of them to respond to the poll. The response was quite positive. Again, very similar to before. They found it very helpful to see what their peers were doing, and they thought it was a very good learning process. But I only have a quarter of the class responding, so I don't think that's going to be very statistically significant. So I didn't report that. But it looks overall very positive. So the ability to be able to upload a PDF and mark it is great. Yeah, you can't annotate the PDF, so they had to find some other way to annotate them and then send them back. But it worked I mean, the students figure it out and there was no issues.
Right. For those of you who are teaching quantitative courses or maybe even English courses where you want students to come in and inline comments and marking up, this was a beta feature we did release and we wanted to test it out in Dave's class. And so, for example, the students submitted their work. And then basically when people evaluate, not only do they have the ability to upload files, they can still keep their comments, but it actually gives the students the ability to go in and provide detailed feedback. So I'm sure that I've talked to a few of you now who would like access to that feedback. So for next semester, those of you with thumbs up and things like that, yeah, we can definitely enable it for your courses moving forward. And I think it's a great step towards where we want to be in terms of inline comments and things of that nature. So does anyone have any questions about this particular feature that they'd like to ask David as well as myself about it?
So I did see a comment come by, like, how do we ensure that they're marked correctly? I did have the TA kind of go through everything to mark. And we would, if anyone was marking poorly, we would comment on them. And this is where we could tell who didn't understand the material. Some people just put a mark and didn't put any comments. So it was mandatory that they put in comments. And in the absence of comments, we would have a chat with that student. So we forced them to put comments in. And as soon as they put comments in, you know exactly how little or how much they know.
Right. And yeah, you had mentioned when we were talking about this earlier that it was almost predictive. You could see by the level of effort they're putting in their evaluation that you kind of knew how they were going to do in terms of other deliverables. Was it more so that you knew that because they weren't making as many markups in the upload as they should have been, or because they weren't providing strong comments? What sort of behavior did you notice and how did you understand it?
It was both. But you could tell from the comments because it was a you know, when you're proving something, there's more than one way to prove something, right? And so the students had to evaluate how someone else was thinking and understand the math behind it. So it was very easy to tell when they put comments in whether or not they understood how other people are doing. And another advantage is they got to see how other people proved things too as well. So it was a win-win-win scenario. It was great for the prof, the student, and also the markers.
Right. No, that's fantastic. And like I said, we built this for David to test it out, and I think it went well initially. It's, again, just the first step of our way towards inline commenting and other markups that might be helpful in the evaluate stage. But if you have any questions, continue to put them in the chat, as well as continue the conversation on Facebook. We'd be more than happy to help you out.
I do have to leave, but I just saw someone ask how big the class was, and we had 14 students. Right. But we could have easily scaled up. The TA was not overworked. I only had one TA for that course.
Awesome.
Okay.
Well, so thanks, Dave.
So anyone wants to reach out to me, it's dwang@uarlu.ca, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks for your time today, David. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Perfect. All right. And so moving along for a few other use cases here. This was a really interesting one that Dr. Robin Bourgeois at Brock U. So she liked Kritik a lot, and she wanted to really test its effectiveness in the class. She teaches women and gender studies, especially gender violence. And so she basically gave 100% of the final grade to Kritik. So she created 10 activities, each worth 10% in a variety of different ways. And so I'll play the video here. Don't think there's any sound, but there's several different types of activities she ran. So starting with just introducing the students to Kritik, she created questions, and she would have liked to be here and explain it herself, but she's quite busy as a vice provost of her department. But she wanted to really share her experience with it. And so she would at first start students by using Critic to create and come up with their own questions about the course material. And she also wanted to try a few other things to sort of reinforce their learning. So she had sort of a photo activity as well. So getting students to take pictures of certain environments or draw their own pictures about really sensitive topics and concepts that students didn't have the facility to discuss in class, especially related to trigger warnings and things of that nature. And she slowly but surely progressed to more difficult as well as more opportunity for the students to explain their thinking behind certain concepts in the class. So if we go down to an activity here, Q&A colonial gender side, the students had practiced the ability to create questions in activities prior. And so now this time she wanted them to actually answer the questions they created. And so this was a really great activity as well for students to not only think about the material, but also think about and learn how to explain it. And the students did really enjoy it. So for most of you who don't know, we actually do survey. We have one survey question in Critic for many of the students. Basically, and you might have seen this as professors, how likely are you to refer a colleague or a student, another peer to Critic? And her class was actually ranked the highest in terms of university courses and third overall for any Critic course. And it was a similar realization for us, for Professor Wang's class as well, where the more that was associated in Critic, the happier the students seemed to be, whether that's because there was no final exam or whether it was because they actually learned. Robin and I had a great conversation about the effectiveness of it, and she'll be continuing to use it in different courses because she felt the students learn more this way as opposed to on an exam or a quiz or a test. And we'd like to show you a lot of material, but because it is, private, really sensitive information, we didn't feel it was right to share it. But I'm sure in a conversation with Robin, she'd be more than happy to send over some examples. So I'll leave her email down below as well. So any questions on creating an activity, like creating questions and how that helps with material and concept understanding? For those of you who have like discussion boards or things that you're looking to optimize, having the students create questions about the material is an easy way to set up. We have a question rubric in Critic. We have an objective and instruction set up for it as well. So something definitely to consider. But moving on, if there's no other questions on that, we'll bring Nina Palmo to the virtual stage here. Nina, do you mind unmuting and saying hello? Hey, Nina, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks again for coming on today and sharing as many times as you have about Critic. So for those of you who don't know, Nina's an assistant professor of instruction at the University of Texas, Austin campus. And she, like Professor Gaynor, who we saw earlier, she used Critic earlier on and has used it in a variety of ways. And so Nina, maybe if you want to give further explanation to how you use Critic and where you see its success.
Sure. Yeah, the first semester I used it, it was in a 300-person class. So similar, it's not 1,700, but it's still just enough that it's hard to really do a whole lot of individual intervention. And we had sort of a perennial problem of the TAs being overworked. And so that was the first semester I tried Critic, and I think it worked really well. The class is kind of broken up into 3 different units, and each one has 6 topics. So for the first 3 topics, I would give students a Critic essay, and they could choose which topic they wanted to write on. But I would tell them that they had a chance to engage with the other topics as well, because they would have to grade submissions on all 3 of those topics, even though they had only written about 1. So it was kind of a way to let them learn about multiple topics more deeply, even if they only wrote about 1. And I think it worked really well. It took the grading load off of the TAs, and I could have them do some things that were more useful for their professional development, like managing the Critic process and helping write some exam questions and things like that. And then that was in the spring. And then this semester, I'm teaching smaller discussion-based courses. And so I've been using Critic to help students prepare for our group discussion. And they really enjoy reading each other's responses to some of the discussion questions. And so I teach mostly the Health and Society program. And so there's a lot of answers to these questions that are not so, there's a lot of gray area. So we might be discussing something like, did this medical professional make the right decision to remove this child from a family to put them into foster care because it was a family that had different cultural understandings of health, for example. And so students write different answers to these questions. And I think that having them read each other's responses before the discussion is really helpful for having a more productive discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. And I love seeing, the way you've modified Critic to help fit a new need in your smaller class. And so my question more so for also the Intro to Health and Society class, you mentioned, using Critic to help ease the burden of the grading load for the TAs. Without Critic, did the students still have the opportunity to submit as many essays, or was it more so just one or two throughout the term that the TAs graded?
I did have the same number of essays, but it was too much. I think I would have needed to cut down otherwise, because it was overwhelming to the TAs who also had to grade exams. And so some of the TAs were excellent and really on top of it, but the more average TAs, there were some TAs have different strengths, just like students and just like we do. And so the ones who were maybe didn't enjoy the grading as much were perpetually behind, and it was always a problem. And so being able to just set a deadline of this is when it has to be graded by, and then the students get their scores quickly, I think has been a really good addition to the class.
Awesome. Yeah, and so now for these smaller sort of discussion, sort of flipped classrooms where you're getting them to prepare in Critic before the class. So how do you structure the create stage and the evaluate stage to correspond with the actual in-class discussion?
So the class meets on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I have the deadline always at 11:59 p.m. So just before midnight. So it's due, the actual essay itself is due on Monday, and then the peer review is due on Wednesday. So that way students can read each other's work before class, and I think many of them do, but if they want to get some additional perspectives on how to grade based on the class discussion, they can either complete their peer reviews before class, or they can do them after class. So they have the option to kind of do it either way.
Mm-hmm. A lot of flexibility on that front
but
for
it's
them.
kind of one weekly assignment of like a Monday, Wednesday, Thursday deadline, and then we do the same thing the following week.
Right. And in terms of other deliverables in the class, do you see, based on the same material, I'm assuming, do you see any sort of impact from Critic on other sort of exams or tests, or where they have a deeper understanding of the material?
It's really hard to say because this is the first semester that we've been fully online. So it's, there are too many variables that changed at once to really be able to isolate anything. But I do think that it has been helpful for students to really engage a bit more, because I think sometimes if students are stressed at the end of the semester, they kind of just submit something and forget about it. And it means that going through and doing the peer reviews means that you can't really do that. You actually have to come back and engage with these topics. And you can't just submit it and forget about it.
Right. Oh yeah, that's great. And talking to professors who've used Critic once before, and so are not teaching the same class, teaching a different class, and trying to think of how it works. Nina, do you think that using Critic more than the one time, does it become easier to use? Do you think that your experience helps you sort of switch classes around? And why did you really decide to use Critic in a much different, much smaller class the second time around?
Well, as a non-tenure track faculty member, my teaching load is heavy. Sometimes I teach 4 classes a semester. And so finding ways to use my time effectively, I think, is really important. And of course, the first semester, there's always a learning curve. And it was a little bit daunting, to jump in, especially in a larger class. I think you just have to kind of set things up and things just have to go according to the plan, because you can't really change things on the fly. But with my smaller classes, I had it mostly, I would say 98% figured out how I was going to do it, but there's some room for experimentation in a smaller class, and you can always kind of do a little bit more experimenting. But I think it does, like anything, it gets easier with time.
Yeah. And yeah, I think Nina's just being modest, it's almost like being adventurous, right? Like you've used it, the first time you used it, there's a lot to learn. You used it again in Intro to Health and Society the second time around, and then again, switching to 2 different classes. But for those of you who are thinking about whether you want to use it again in a different class, I think Nina would be a great resource. And I'm even commenting on Facebook or just talking around the community. We have several professors like Nina, like Alex, who have used Critic in a variety of courses to achieve several different goals of what you want to accomplish in the class. So before we move on to sort of our last example, is there anyone else that has any questions for Nina in terms of using it in small versus big classes or for writing exercises in Critic, like essays in general? Sounds good. If you have any questions, you can always email me or talk in the community about it. But Nina is a seasoned user of Critic, and I'm sure she'd have some great comments and insights if you need her help. And so now moving on, thank you, Nina. Appreciate your insight. And I think people will definitely be reaching out if they have questions about that. I'd like to bring Mr. Elliot Curry to the stage. Elliot, can you unmute and talk a little bit for us here?
Well, good afternoon. I can appreciate Nina's being on tenure track. I was tenure track, but I still had a 70% teaching load at one time. But I've actually known Mosen, I think he's still around, for about 12 years, since when he was in a company of about 6 people.
Right.
So this is just a continuation of their efforts, and I've always been a fan of theirs. But when I heard about Critic, I implemented it into a grad course last winter because I could not universally overpower or overrule other faculty. I was teaching a third-year financial management course. And so I teach primarily management courses. And one course I introduced Critic into last January was a Master's of Biotech. And so what I had was 20 students that I taught actually the term before, and now I was going to be teaching them even more. But what the trick was is they were primarily science students, and they were in a position where I was going to ask them to do all kinds of management type of tasks, which could be rather challenging. And when I looked at what they were going to do, I actually got parachuted into the course because somebody decided to leave the university in December. So in about 2 weeks, I introduced Critic. But I wanted the students to get a chance to evaluate and assess one another, because they're going to all move into management type positions sooner or later. And as RAs, TAs, managers, team leaders, they're going to be stuck in a position of either assessing somebody who reports to them or being stuck in a 360-degree evaluation, or at least they get to a position of where they appreciate what it's like to assess somebody else. So that's a good skill. At the second time, I had 6 assignments about between 1 and 2 weeks apart. And this gave them the opportunity to assess one another in a method that they were not that familiar with, in that they had to write a business report in a business setting. So I'd given them some tools earlier, and now they had to understand what they were actually talking about. And these are all students in, which is rare in Canada, a totally self-funded program. So there's no government money coming in this program. So these students are very motivated. They came into the program and they wanted to do well. I would say out of the 20 students each year, 2 go into medical school the next year. So they're fairly high performing. They are swinging for the over the green monster in baseball. So these students are not underachievers. We also have, to pick up another point earlier, a multicultural aspect. There's out of 20 students, there's like 3, 4, 5 that might be new Canadians. Some might be very reluctant to express themselves in a classroom setting, but in a written environment where they can get feedback from their peers, they seem to blossom. And I think somebody noted that earlier in one of the chats. So I wanted to give them an opportunity where they didn't have to just rely on my grading, because with 18, 20 students, I didn't have a TA, unlike some people at Waterloo, but I'm at the University of Guelph, so it's only about a 45-minute drive. And this tool looked to me like something I could encourage the students to try. Now, we didn't use the calibration last year because didn't know about it, didn't have it. But I did find that the students got significantly better as the term went on. And I would say after the second or third, similar to a comment made earlier, the second or third attempt at this, they were very consistent in how they're grading one another. And though I had to deal with a couple of students who disagreed with their grades, generally speaking, they were very appreciative of what they got. They looked at these things and they got better and better at writing. I tried to encourage them with their communication that it's qualitative, but I want quantitative, substantial feedback. So they had 3 evaluations. The problem with the 18, 20 students was they started to figure out whose paper was who.
Right.
So they occasionally, and I see Nino nodding, every so often they start putting in somebody's name. They know exactly who they're assessing. That's the beast that we're dealing with only like 18, 20 students.
Mm-hmm.
But they were very honest and open. And then in the underside of all this, they were doing team assignments to the side. So they'd be assessing Harvard or Western or Dartmouth situations, scenarios, cases. There's a large scientific component, biotechnology, so it could be pharmaceutical, could be agribusiness, could be food science, etc. So they had to rely on their science, but then apply it into a management situation. So they were very good at quickly recognizing that science you have to get past, and then you have to explain to one another. Fortunately, their audience, once they understood the audience, they knew how to write better. But you can see comments like grammar was great, only minor area. Listeria should be italicized. Okay, so fine. What was good was I could interact with the other courses they were taking in the program to make sure that what we were doing was consistent with what they were taking in the other courses, because they were taking these other classes with one another, and then I sat on committees with the professors. So in that way, it was very good. I did get a little bit of pushback from some admin because we had a peer evaluation system already developed on campus. But when I asked them if they had the robust facilities and that Kritik have, like you can have 3 with written evaluations, different sort of assessments, and then assessment of the assessors, they recognized they didn't. So I felt, this is worthwhile. As it was, quote, a beta at the time, I did bankroll the whole class to take this course, but this coming winter, the students will be bankrolling themselves. And I think they did respond very positively to what we did. They did like it. Some, unlike most university students, actually, some of these people have like teenage kids, or were actually in management positions themselves. They're taking this part-time. I don't know how you do a grad master's program full-time, have a full-time job, and be married and have kids. That's juggling 4 things. That's one thing too many. All us academics know exactly what that's like. So it gave the students an excellent opportunity to review paper, improve their own by seeing what other people are doing, that they had the chance to get better at what they're doing. So that was always nice. Reiterate. And I think the rubric, having a very clear cut rubric helps. So I was very consistent. The rubric that we used in the Kritik was actually somewhat similar to what we used for the other outside assignments, just in a much more focused effort. This is just dealing with whether it's golden rice or dealing with a technology transfer issue, intellectual property, items like that. So this was excellent for the students.
Yeah, thanks, Elliot. I mean, that's as great of a breakdown you'll get. He was one of our first users and has come around this time again to teach a similar class. If not, I think it's the same class this term, and very excited for calibration and excited to see more data and more insight into how it works. And if you guys have any questions, Elliot is hilarious. He's a very funny man. And so I'm sure he'd be more than happy to share some information with you guys if you have any questions about case-based learning and things that you can use there. But we have one more example I want to show. So thanks again, Elliot. And I'll reach out to you about your course, but later today. But We have one more I want to show, a special guest who just joined after actually teaching a class, and that is Scott Johnson. Scott, can you unmute and say hello?
Yeah, hello everybody. I apologize for joining late, but just finished teaching a class.
Hey, teaching takes priority. No worries there.
Right.
Thanks again for joining. And so I'll give a really quick intro on Scott, and we'll talk a bit about how he used it. But Scott teaches a chemistry course at BYUI, and Scott's actually familiar with peer review before using Critic. And so Scott, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about how you use peer review in your classes before and how you use Critic now to sort of optimize that process?
Sure. So 2 years ago, I started teaching a course in our department, and it's a technical writing course for our chemistry and biochemistry majors. And in this course, what we do is we have the students for the first few weeks conduct a simple experiment and collect data. And then the rest of the semester, they spend writing a technical article, a technical journal article. And so they go through each of the different sections. So they'll write a methods section and a results section and a discussion section and an introduction section and then an abstract and a title. And they do them in sections. And then at the end of the semester, they compile all of the information into a full paper. And when I started teaching this class, we already had built into the class peer review. But the peer review process was pretty weak. So each section, as they'd write each section of the paper, they'd go through a peer review with their colleagues in the class. And but there wasn't good enough feedback being provided through our process so that people could improve as peer reviewers. And I recognize that that's an important skill. It's an important skill in probably any aspect of life, is the ability to provide effective feedback to the people that you're working with and the people that you interact with. So I was looking for a way that we can improve our students' ability to give good peer review comments to one another. And I became aware of Critic and started looking into it and decided to give it a try with Eli's help. Eli helped me set it up in my class. And this semester is the first semester that we've used Critic as our peer review tool in this class. And what I've observed this semester is that the students are getting feedback through the Critic process that are helping them become better, more effective peer reviewers. And so I love that. I love that about what's happened this semester. And I can tell that by looking at the comments that I see from the students that they're giving to one another. Now, I've learned some things from the semester. I wished if I could go back and do it again, that I would have given the students more information up front about how Critic works and about the type of feedback that they're going to be getting. And that's what I'm going to do next semester when I teach this class again. But they were a little bit lost at the first about how to use Critic effectively, but that caused some really good questions and good conversations between the students and me. And we had a chance to really go through and figure out how Critic worked and how it was impacting the way I was grading them and what they could do to become better peer reviewers. And those were some really good conversations that I never had when we weren't using Critic and we had another process in place that I think was pretty ineffective.
That's part of the reason why I wanted to bring you on, Scott, having used peer review before extensively and understanding how it works, to then already just one semester in see some benefits to using it. That obviously is what we're trying to achieve here. And something to keep in mind for the rest of you, I'm sharing my screen here, is that Scott gave some really detailed instructions on the create, the evaluate, and the feedback stage. I think this was later on, several activities in, sort of what he mentioned about prepping the students for Critic. And I think this really, really helped the students understand what's to be expected of them, giving them some questions on how to frame their evaluations as well. And if we even just take a look at an example, with that sort of direction, students are providing much stronger, they know where to provide comments, where to provide feedback, and things of that nature, and taking the evaluation more seriously. So for those of you who are teaching, STEM courses that have lab reports or scientific writing, I think Scott would be a fantastic resource for you to sort of work with, and for him to share his ideas, because as you can see here, he scaffolded several different parts of the lab report process, from the introduction to the methods to the results, the discussion, and then also a poster as well. So I was really impressed with the functionality of it, the purpose of it, a really purpose-driven approach to the Critic process. And I'm sure a lot of his materials can help some of you guys out, figure out what you want to do in your STEM courses. So we have to unfortunately move along here. So thank you, Scott. That's really, really helpful. I'm sure in the Facebook community, you'll probably get some questions from those who want to create similar assignments. But if you guys have any questions for Scott, feel free to chat with him right now in Zoom. And yeah, thanks again, Scott. Thanks for coming right after class. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Eli,
And so now, yeah, go ahead.
Had them do a whole 5. How many? It seems like a fairly large and detailed project to give feedback on these papers, and I'm thinking about doing something similar next semester. So I'm curious if you had them do 5 peer evaluations or just focus on a smaller number.
Yeah, so we started out at 5, and I brought it down to 3, and so that's what we're doing right now is 3.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Also, Scott, someone is asking now that you're there is, did you find that the students, I think this is coming from Laura, did you find that your students, if they don't like feedback, then they might, give too harsh, grading on the feedback stage, feedback on feedback?
That was definitely a problem towards the first of the semester, as some of the students complained that the feedback was becoming too harsh, or it was too harsh at the first of the semester. And one of the ways that we address that is making sure that the students understood how their peer review grade was being scored. And it was being scored by how well their grading of the creation of their fellow students matched the overall average. And it also depended on how motivating their comments were and how helpful their comments were. And once they understood that concept, that's part of what I didn't explain well at the first of the semester. But once the students understood that, you could see that their effectiveness as peer reviewers got better, just like Elliot mentioned. You could see over the progress of the semester that they got better at doing what we want them to do, is be more effective at their peer review. Hopefully that helps.
For sure. All right, so I guess now we'll move on to a really exciting part of the presentation. Like I said, feel free to continue the conversation on Facebook, talk about different use cases. That's why we want to create the community. So now I'm going to pass it off to our product manager, Natasha, who's actually going to share her screen in a second and go through some of the new updates that are coming to Critic. And I think a lot of you will be happy about some of the new features we're releasing. So whenever you're ready, Natasha.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, Eli. I'm really excited. I get one of the most fun jobs just introducing new features. So let me just give me a second to share my screen and then we can go from there.
Sounds good.
All right, great. So yeah, I get to introduce some upcoming features that we've been working on. Yeah, let's just jump into it. So the first new feature that we've been working on that should be coming out pretty soon is a group member assessment. So this would be used when you have a group project and you want to be able to allow the group to evaluate each other on how they performed during that group project. So I'm just going to hop over to Figma here to show you guys a little bit of the designs. So basically how it would work is when students, or when you're creating the activity, you're going to have to select that it is a group project. And then you're going to select that the evaluation type is group members. So basically group members evaluating each other on how they contributed to the group. You would select the groups that you wanted them to evaluate, and how it's going to work is the creation would be the student describing their contribution to the previous group assignments. And then during the evaluate stage, their peers would review their explanations and use a rubric to assess the contribution of their peers. I'm just going to shift a little bit over to the student view. Just so you guys can see. So in the creation stage, it would just be like a normal activity. You would give them the objective, the instructions, the rubric, and they would submit their creation like normal. And this would just be, again, their description of their work during the previous group project. Then in the evaluation stage, it actually, there would be where they would be able to see who they're evaluating actually. Because then they actually know which group member is saying what they did in the project. So the evaluation stage actually isn't anonymous because they need to be able to see who they're evaluating on the group project work. So they'd see the person's name, they'd see what that person described that they contributed to the group project, and then they would be able to give them their evaluation and feedback based off of those statements. And then in the feedback on feedback stage is when it would be anonymous. So then they would get their evaluations back and they would see all of their evaluations from their peers in their group project. And that's kind of how that type of assessment would work. Ideally, we'd want this to be used twice throughout the term. This is because then they would do it near the beginning of the term, maybe after their first group activity that they do together. And then they would be able to work on whatever evaluations they got and improve for the end of the term. And then you could do it again near the end of the term to see if they had improved and taken that feedback and improved upon themselves. So the next feature that we're going to be looking at is changing activity weight. So again, we have some designs that I'm just going to show you guys really quick for this one. So basically, when you are on the activities page, you're going to see the completed activities at the bottom of the activities page and this options drop down. And then when you click on the options drop down, you're going to be able to see grading scheme and activity grading weight. And then you're just able to select the activity grading weight for these completed activities and change them based off of if you find that you wanted to have an activity actually weighted more than some of the other ones or less. Just gives you a little bit more flexibility to choose different weights for all of the activities. So now we're going to be looking at grade sync. So I'm just going to present this, but basically we are working on LMS integration. So how this would work and why it would be useful is that you'd be able to basically just click a button in Kritik and it would sync your grades in Kritik to your LMS. Currently, we are working on Canvas integration, but then following that will also be Blackboard and D2L. There would have to be a little bit of work with school administration to make sure that we have the approval to integrate that school with the Kritik platform. But once that's set up, you'd just be able to sync the grades that you have in Kritik right to the LMS that you're using. So the next feature is anytime submission. So basically, this would be a pop-up that would come up when a student submits their assignment late. You would be able to either reject the late creation altogether. So if you didn't want to accept it at all, that's fine, you can reject it. But then instead, you could also apply a late penalty. So if that's how the structure of your course works, and you want to be able to apply a late penalty instead of just outright rejecting the assignment, you would be able to do that as well right into the system through this pop-up that would come up if a student submitted an assignment late. Another thing that we are working on is improved feedback models. So basically, we're also still open to suggestions at this point for any feedback models that you guys use, such as RISE, SBI, TAG, and how this would work. It would basically be more of a structured form that would give them an idea on more how you want them to submit their feedback. So actually, I think we have a design for this as well. So maybe it's worth bringing that up. So yeah, basically, so something like SBI, you could have that at the top, and then they'd be able to provide more of a specific structure for feedback. Again, open suggestions. So if you guys have any strong opinions on how feedback models, ones that you like and work with, feel free to reach out and let us know. This would be like an example of the RISE feedback model that you would be able to select their students to fill this out, just so they have a little bit more direction on how you want them to provide feedback to the assignments that they're evaluating.
Yes, Natasha, maybe add that here. So we are going to have one full sprint dedicated to improving the feedback, how we make the structure of giving feedback, I guess, more effective. And there's a bunch of models out there. There is, sandwich model that most people hate, but still some people like it. And then there is, like RISE model. There is something called SBI model. There's all kinds of models, TAG model. So what we're gonna do is we obviously, if you guys know any good model, definitely send us your way if you have any specific feedback. But it would be something that you would pick based on your course content, the kind of assignments, which kind of model fits well, so that students sort of have some structures when they give feedback to each other.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Mohsen. So a couple other features that are a little bit less fleshed out at the moment are the best answer key and splitting students into different activity features. So for the best answer key, this would just be making it easier for students to grade by giving them the answer key during the evaluation stage. So you'd be able to upload an answer key, and then when they're in the evaluation stage, they would be able to see it while they're doing their evaluations, just so making it a little bit easier so that they can see the answer key or solution directly provided by you guys. And then splitting students into different activities. This would be in a use case where maybe you wanted students to choose from a couple different activities. So basically, this would be an extension of the current group activity by allowing each group member to submit their own. And then this would just be able to create separation so that students who are working on a certain assignment would evaluate students working on the same assignment that they chose. And then lastly, we just have some other upcoming features, including reordering rows in the rubric, changing scores after the activity is finalized, showing the original dispute. So if you have a course where you're working on it with a couple different TAs or instructors and they resolve a dispute, you'd still be able to go back and see the original dispute and look over it in case there was further issues with that dispute. Also importing content from different courses, maybe past courses, editing score for feedback and written evaluations, and many more. So that is all I have today for the new features. And yeah, thank you. Pass it back to Eli, I guess, for now, unless anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask.
I have a question, Natasha. Is there anything into, like, so let's say you have 5 graders grading something and it's non-subjective, and rather than giving the average of those 5 graders, you're gonna give the majority. If the majority gave them 1 and only 1 person screwed up, because otherwise I have to go through so many disputes.
Yeah, so Laura, if you're talking, so that feature, we have it right now for binary. I don't know if that, would it be, or do you want it for non-binary rubric? Because right now the binary rubrics, like, let's say the criteria is students, attach a file, yes or no. So if this is yes, or if it's no. So for this one, which is like it's a binary, then yes, we actually already, we have it, we call it like a median. We use the median as opposed to.
I don't think you do have that, or you didn't for my last 2 assignments. When did you implement it?
We implement this in the, and Eli probably maybe you know, or James maybe you know, I think we implemented toward the end of the semester. Maybe you're right. Maybe the first few activities we didn't have it.
Okay, actually what I would like to see is if you could put some sort of, so I agree if it's 1 or 0, but what if I could make the decision when I make the rubric that I would like it to be non-subjective, so even if it was something worth 4 points, I could still take the majority. Just a thought, but
for sure, yeah, we could. Those are great ideas. That's what we are here to get the idea. We'll definitely put it down there for sure.
Thank you.
I have a question about the first group thing that Natasha mentioned in her presentation. So I have a group of 3 people working on a project. I grade the project. I don't want them to grade the project. What I want them to give me is how much each contributed to the project. And without disputes. So they don't see it. I only see it. So it seemed to me that what I request is sort of a subset of what your functionality is, which is, if you're in a group with Eli and John, and you say Eli didn't do anything, the guy is a slacker, and
probably true.
You allow Eli to comment, what are you talking about, Natasha? I did everything. You didn't do anything. So it seems to me that there is in the thing that you described, there is that process that's very similar to the creation, evaluation, feedback mechanism.
Let me explain. That's a good question. Thanks. Let me explain. Actually, no. So what we're actually building is going to do exactly what you want. Which means that you could actually have students to do group activities and only use Kritik for them to evaluating their peers contribution without worrying about what the original activity grade was and all that. So you can actually do that with this. The reason that we added that layer of creation is because it helps the students when they are going to evaluate. We think that it helps them to have a hearing of what the original student is saying. At the end of the day, let's say I'm going to evaluate Eli, and I feel that Eli is a slacker, but I still benefit from knowing what Eli has to say. Maybe Eli had an excuse. Maybe he says, guys, I know I didn't do well because, something happened in my personal life or whatever. And then I feel like, maybe because of that, I would agree maybe that there was something in his life that I shouldn't. Like, we think that the extra information is just really extra information for evaluators to just read it. But at the end of the day, they're going to make their own, choice. There is no dispute to back and forth or anything.
So eventually what I will get is a weight that Eli contributed little to the project, Natasha did very much, John did with something in between.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I will say, this grade, you got 90 out of 100 because I graded it, but then I'll give Eli less, I give Natasha more, something like that.
Exactly.
Okay.
You have that extra information, so you have the original grade, and with this Kritik activity, you get that extra information or the grade that you can say, now I can apply it to the original grade, better however you want it.
Yeah, that's what I do in Excel now. So whatever Kritik gives me to help me, excellent news.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's been requested a lot with a lot of professors. I'll be surprised that no solutions out there, but that would be helping many professors that do group activities.
All right, guys. I think just in the interest of time, we'll keep it moving. Any questions? It'll be a great discussion for the Facebook discussion group where we can all chime in. And so we'll wrap up here with a few messages from our leadership team here. So Mohsin and Kareen, I'm sure they have their own introductions prepped. So Mohsin, feel free to take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Eli, and thanks everyone for the time. It's a pleasure to be here and hearing all those great things. So for those of you who don't know me and my co-founder, I co-founded Top Hat previous to Kritik. As Dr. Elliot Carey mentioned, he actually was one of our first adopter of Top Hat 10 years ago. some of you might be familiar with Top Hat. So I did my PhD at the University of Waterloo, and I did engineering there. I did artificial intelligence and all that, and I want to engage the students in my TA classes. That's what I started Top Hat, and then and over the last 10 years, I was working at Top Hat with many professors. Maybe Karen, you can introduce yourself.
Yes, so yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing all the great insights from your course. This is great to see. Yeah, my name is Karine Marette, and I come from France. I immigrated in Canada in 2013. Like Mohsen, I have a master's degree in computer science in AI, and when I came to Canada, I extended my degree in a bachelor degree in psychology and some certificates in mental health. And I have built a few companies, and then of course, education is my passion. Yeah.
Yeah, if you go to the next slide, Eli, well, I think it's great. I mean, we're going to get to the end of it. You guys heard about what's in the roadmap in the short term, Natasha mentioned, but I thought that might be good for you guys to know what's our vision, because this is a little bit of long-term plans that we have. For those of you who want to know what keeps us busy, in our planning, essentially, what we recognize, especially my working with many educators during Top Hat time, was that there is a core problem with the assessments. With the new generation, especially with Generation Z, you can call them or whatnot. And this problem starts from before even they enter to university. So, they have to take this standardized test, which by many research and findings, they're becoming very ineffective. It's actually not really showing any correlation. So the problem assessment starts from there. And then during the courses, of course, professors have been using a Scantron or multiple choice questions, or sort of those objective tests that has been effective, by the way, for previous century when there was no internet, there was no check, there was no those cheating websites, and answers, never get online. But obviously with this new area, it's extremely difficult for educators to accurately measure the learning that's happening in the classroom. So, and then after that, then the students have to find a job. And then there also still have problem with how they can actually prove the qualification to the candidates. And honestly, this is taking a lot of time for everyone to assess someone. So this is basically what we are trying to address with our platform. It's a long projects that we have. And if you go next slide, we just actually raised a seed round of funding about a week ago, 2 weeks ago. We raised $1 million. We started fundraising, about a month ago, and we got a lot of interest from people that they saw the vision that we had. So I don't know if you guys know, like Apply Board, for example, is a platform that is the fastest growing company in Canada. And Apply Board, what it does is that it helps the students around the world to get access to education. So they help universities to recruit the students, essentially. So they saw the value of Kritik, and they were investing in Kritik because they see that they could actually help universities with the problem that they have in recruitment. But beyond the recruitment of students, what we are seeing is that what we could do together, with obviously with the help of you guys doing the hard work, is that we're trying to recycle assignments that students are doing in the courses in a way that it could be more useful. So we do it in two phases. The phase one is that we're recycling those assignments into content. So we heard earlier that the students, creating this amazing presentation. So, a lot of you guys have to update your course content. You have to create questions semester after semester. Information changes year after year or semester after semester. So you assign new courses, you have to curate new content. A lot of those tasks you're doing is really daunting for you to do. So what we're doing is that we're trying to build this workflow for you, as you're going forward, so that you could turn the students' assignments into content that either you could use it yourself for for your next semester or for the current semester, or students can basically share and use for their own learning. So that's phase one for recycling the assignment bits. And then there's phase two, and Karine is interested in that.
Mohsen explained the vision to recycle assignments into content. The next phase is to recycle these content into an e-portfolio for students. So right now, students, when they are using the peer evaluation at Kritik, the incentive that they have is to receive a good grade. But on top of that, with this student portfolio platform, they can develop the incentive to work hard during university to have the various opportunity in the workforce, because we would like to be kind of like LinkedIn by recycling all those content that they have done throughout the semester. And instead of having LinkedIn where the content is written by people, the content within this platform, it will be having a lot of incentive for students to work hard to show off themselves at the end, post-graduation. Next slide, Eli.
And just as you're going to the next slide, really quick anecdote, because I thought you guys would find it interesting. As we're talking about this, we're looking to hire some more awesome people to our team. And I was on LinkedIn the other day and I messaged someone and they said, oh, I actually used Kritik at my course in the University of Guelph. And actually was a student in your class, Elliot. And so just sort of along that lines, it would be really cool then if we could sort of see, how the student performed in your class very objectively and sort of not in a streamlined way that would give us a better sense of impartial feedback on someone's criteria moving into the workforce.
Great, thanks, John. And then just to remind everyone that the Kritik has been built based on empirical data from the beginning. Mohsen conducted an experiment in a few classrooms. He concluded that the students are able to produce great content, such as like great questions for textbooks. And then to these qualitative analysis, I conducted a quantitative analysis. I quantified various factors, such as the number of peer evaluations necessary to align with the professor's grade, and so much more factors. Next year, we would like to continue our empirical data research to enhance the Kritik platform. And I have illustrated three main concerns that we can do. First is to enhance the algorithm that differentiate good graders. I think Trashy talked about it today, that he will have to have a better algorithm. So we are working on it. Second, we would like to develop a more effective feedback models that drives the best quality of evaluation. And Natasha and Mohsen explained earlier some models about the RISE, Sandwich, TAG, and SBI. And third, we would like to increase student engagement to perform a grade for more than a grade. And that motivation will be the key of success using Kritik. So as I said, the last image is about connecting the performance during university to job opportunity after post-graduation. And then right now we are hoping that we can work with some of you. So if you're interested to share your findings from the use of Kritik in your course with the rest of the community, please let us know. You can email Eli. Everyone, I think, has the email of Eli, or send on the chat box. There is a poll right now that on your screen. And then, so the next phase is for our next event. We are hoping to present some of your data. So thank you, Chair.
Yeah, just to expand on that point really quickly, Karine and Mohsen and all of us really at Kritik, because we really want to make peer review and peer evaluation a massive component of education, both at undergraduate and graduate levels. Several of you have mentioned how important it is to actually practice that skill, how it also helps with retention. So we talked to a few of you about research opportunities. I think, as Karen mentioned at the beginning of this conference, is that even in her own community, it was a great place to collaborate. So if you want to start a discussion on the Facebook group and talk to us there and maybe collaborate with others and more classes, more data, we might be able to set something up for next term. And it would help us, obviously, it would help you make some publications to understand peer review effectiveness, and it also help us improve how we're making an academic impact. So I know we're a little bit past 2 p.m., but I just wanted to thank you guys again for taking the time out of a busy day, busy week, and what seems like a busy semester to come be here and help not only our team, but our product, but the process of what we want to do. I really do encourage you to learn more from one another online at the Facebook group. Continue to like the page. We'll continue adding you there. And I think no one likes making rubrics. And I think some of you have made some great rubrics that we can share around and sort of make this process better. So feel free to email me with any questions or concerns after this call. And thanks again, guys, for joining me. I had a blast, even though I was locked out for a few minutes because of internet. It was a great experience. And hopefully the next time we do this, there will be a lot more professors to join.
So I just look at the result right now for publishing findings on peer review effectiveness in the academic journal. So just to give you some, I cannot tell you the news because I'm working on it, but I have contacted a few professionals who have already published a few peer review papers. And then hopefully we can do some co-writing also with them. So most likely for the next event, we will have those information.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys. If anyone wants to add anything or ask any questions or anything, we're open. If you want to drop out, then it's already been 2 hours. We appreciate that also.
Thank you so much. Yeah. And then, yeah, I would like to say thank you.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, you can ask.
Eli, looks like your Wi-Fi is
Yeah, we're using a cellular network now. I had a few gigs to work with. This was my last resort plan. That's where we're at. So
okay. Perfect.
Take care, guys.
I'm going to stop recording. And yeah, I think we mentioned this for whoever's still in here. We're obviously going to share all the results from today, all the data, all the feedback, and the recorded session. Thanks, Eli, for organizing everything.